And then after that, when you do the Ajax post request, it's going to hit this particular if condition, right? It's not going to go into this section because it's not a get request, it's a post request. And you can see that I first extract the user message, and then I get the session ID, and then I get the project ID from the environment variable, and then the location ID and the agent ID also from the environment variable. So this is all coming from the .env file that I showed you before. And this step here, I would say these three steps in tandem, these things are what makes your API call work. Okay, so let's go over them one by one. The first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you construct the URL correctly, and for that you have to note that it is actually v3 beta 1. That's the URL you're going to hit. It's dialogflow.googleapis.com/v3 beta 1, and then it has to be followed by /projects/project ID /location/location ID /agent/agent ID, and then for the environments you just pass in a simple dash, just the hyphen. Okay, and then after that you have to have /sessions/session ID, and then you have a colon. Detect intent is the actual API method that you are going to use, and you actually create a headers object, and in that the content type will be JSON, and then the authorization will have bearer space whatever is the access token. And also one more thing to note is that the payload JSON format is slightly different in the case of v3 beta 1. I think that in v2, if I'm not mistaken, the language code used to be outside of the query input JSON, and I think now they have moved it into the query input JSON object or something like that. You have to go and check it out, but I do remember that the structure of this payload JSON has changed from v2 to v3. Okay, and this is all. The rest of the stuff is fairly standard. You have to do a call, and then you of course this is converting it into actual JSON, and then you call the API URL and pass in your headers and your data, and then you get the result back, and from the result you will have to go and look at the specific response messages. This is the format that you have for v3 beta 1. Again, you can find this in the documentation, and then the response JSON is just converting it into a JSON, and then I return that back to my and remember that here you're just going to return a JSON object back. You're not going to do any render template or anything like that, because this is an Ajax request and it's not actually doing a refresh of the page. It's just going to send some JSON data back to the Ajax caller. Okay, so then once that information is received here after the submit, you can see that on the success, it's just going to get your JSON and just dump it into this HTML of this div response message. And once it does that, it's going to add the div response message into the chat box div. It's going to append it at the end of the chat box div, so that we have this, the format of that looks like it's all happening in sequence. So that's the basic code for the app.py, and you can see that this whole thing, the integration can be built using just these two scripts. I'll talk in a later video about all the things you must actually do if you want to make this a little more robust. But to just get the integration working and to get the basic idea, this is all you need to get working.